You, yes you are a bigot. Are you a straight man who only wants to have sex with women? Are you a gay man who only wants to have sex with men? Are you a bisexual man who wants to have sex with people of both sexes, but only if they're good looking? Are you asexual? You're a bigot. According to Samantha Allen of the Daily Beast, it is, quote, deeply disappointing but unsurprising that under 20% of Americans in a recent survey said they would be open to having sex with a transgender person. That's because, she says, quote, cultural acceptance has tended to lag behind formal recognition. It turns out that according to the left, all sexual behavior is malleable and based largely on social structures that have been implemented by the patriarchy. Men and women don't exist, but for their self-perception. We know that a man can be a woman, and a woman can be a man, regardless of biology. That's why Caitlyn Jenner isn't just a man with a mental disorder and some plastic surgery and hormone injections. Caitlyn Jenner is as much of a woman as Michelle Obama. The left reasons that if a man can be a woman, then a man who only wants to have sex with biological women must be a bigot. His desires have been wrongly defined by a society that restricted the definition of womanhood to, like women. If only men had been exposed to the deeper truth of gender early, if only they'd known that some women have male genitalia, then perhaps they'd be willing to have sex with biological men who are actually women. The same holds true with regard to homosexuals, of course. If a woman is a lesbian, it's discriminatory of her to not want to have sex with a man who identifies as a woman. Her desires have also been shaped by her environment, and her environment has drawn a stark, but wrong, oh ever so wrong, contrast between biological men and biological women. If all of this sounds insane, that's because it's totally crazy. Straight men are attracted to women, not men who identify as women. Straight women are attracted to biological men. As a general rule, homosexuals are attracted to members of the same biological sex. Attempting to pretend away reality does not change that reality. But the left is plagued by two myths that lie in direct opposition to one another. The first, all human behavior can be changed by changing society at large. The second, all human behavior is innate and unchanging. Under the first myth, if we just train people that men and women are the same and that even their genitals don't provide a meaningful difference, men will begin having sex with transgender women, and women will begin having sex with transgender men. Under the second myth, however, transgender identity itself is immutable and unchanging, as is homosexuality and heterosexuality. This provides an unanswerable conundrum for transgender advocates. How can they get people to accept transgender people sexually when people's sexuality is supposedly unchanging? So the left merely ignores the problem and papers it over with the word bigot. Reality isn't bigotry. People are attracted to people they're attracted to. There is a biological component to that, as well as a cultural component, but ignoring biology in favor of culture is idiotic, and ignoring culture in favor of biology is ignorant. They both play a part. The suggestion that discriminatory nastiness is at the root of perfectly logical biological desire for people to have sex with members of the opposite biological sex is merely a slur, a crutch to cover up the illogic of the far left when it comes to both gender and sex. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.
Good evening, Mr. Shapiro. I have a question for you as a Harvard Law School graduate.
Sure.
Regarding the incident in Camp Randall, the man was asked to take off the quote-unquote noose around his head. Under the Brandenburg test, is this constitutionally able for the police to ask him to take off this rope, or is it considered free speech?
So, I assume that it's free speech under, the idea that it's not first of all, shouting fire in a crowded theater is based on a case that was Schenck, which has been debunked for 60 years. But yes, I'm not sure what the campus regulations are. There are policies that exist on campus that don't exist anywhere else in American life, and the Supreme Court has approved some of those things because there are time and space constraints. But if it's message specific, then you get into trouble. So it's at the very least, in my legal opinion, it's constitutionally questionable. That doesn't mean that I think it's a great idea or I think that it's a wonderful exercise of freedom of speech, but it is definitely questionable. Anytime there's a free speech question, I tend to lean on the side of free speech. And by the way, folks, if I'm answering to camera, that's only because there are people who are watching on the live stream, and it looks weird if I'm talking out here. So.
Mr. Shapiro, thank you for taking a principled stance, criticizing Trump this election cycle. Thank you for introducing me to Harambe memes.
Well, that's his memory.
Last week, John Oliver used his show as a call to arms to support Planned Parenthood because Republicans have the House, the Senate, the White House. Do you anticipate pushback within the Republican Party if the pro-life movement tries to move forward with its agenda in the next 2 years?
This is a really good question. I'm not sure how committed Donald Trump is to, for example, reversing funding for Planned Parenthood, right? He said early in the primaries that he liked Planned Parenthood. He thought that they did some good work. It'll be interesting to see if he clashes with the new Congress over that, because clearly Paul Ryan and a lot of other members of Congress would like to withdraw federal funding for Planned Parenthood. Obviously, I think that's a good idea. I think abortion is immoral, and the idea that I'm paying for somebody else's baby to be killed seems pretty ridiculous, morally, ethically, legally to me. I think all of it's really dubious. It is definitely questionable. As far as John Oliver, we have a really bad habit in this country of taking everybody seriously if they have a British accent. And that seems to me a bad mistake. We ought to judge John Oliver by the content of his speech, not the quality thereof.
We've seen...
Thank you, Ben. Huge fan. Would you say it's possible for the left to recognize broken families as one of the biggest problems in American society? And if so, what would it take for the left to realize how big of a problem this is?
Okay, so the left is never going to recognize that broken families are a problem because it is one of the goals of the left to break families. Historically speaking, if you read Marx and Engels, they do not like the traditional family. They think the traditional family is a bulwark against an overarching brutal state. Right, so the idea is, and they want the overarching brutal state, so therefore they don't want the family. The family is a bunch of people who care about each other more than they care about the community at large. And so this is why in Soviet Russia, the chief goal was to separate children from their family, have them turn on their parents. I mean, some of the great Soviet heroes in the Soviet Union were kids who reported their parents to the authorities. Right, so the left has never been in favor of traditional families. They see it as a threat. Because traditional families don't vote according to how the left wants them to vote. They vote in favor of leave me alone. I've got my family. It's my job to protect them. So the left is never going to stand up in favor of that to the detriment of everybody involved. And therefore, it's incumbent on particularly religious people, because religion still has a significant amount of weight in American life, unlike in Europe. It's incumbent on religious people to make sure that their kids understand the value of family. It's incumbent on secular thinkers to make clear to people that broken homes, that single motherhood is not an affirmative good. And when Hollywood tells these lies, a great book by Charles Murray it's called Coming Apart, and it's actually about white poor people, white poverty versus white wealth. And he says one of the problems is a lot of people who exist in the white wealthy sphere, people in Hollywood, they live like traditionally religious people, but they preach like far leftists. So they'll be married, they'll have kids, they'll have the same divorce rate as kind of normal folks, but then they'll preach that all families are created equal. And look, this is not to say there can't be great single moms. There can. It's not to say there can't be crappy two-parent homes. Of course there can. But on a general level, if you are born into a two-parent family, you do have an advantage over people who are born into a one-parent family. It is everybody in this room's responsibility to live out these ideals, teach them to your kids, and teach them to all the people around you, regardless of race. Okay, and I understand there are people. I spoke at a school called Otay Ranch High School in San Diego, and it's a largely low-income minority crowd. I don't know how the public school approved it, but they did. And so I was speaking to them, and at one point I said exactly what I've said here. Single motherhood is a predictor of poverty, and if you're impoverished for all of your adult life in the United States, it's because you're not good with money. It's because you make bad decisions with your money. And the principal actually walked down and shut down the speech and excused the entire class if they wanted to leave, because he said there are too many kids here who are products of single mothers, and they might be offended. Okay, if you can't tell people the truth because they might be offended, we're never going to get anywhere here. So we have to tell people the truth regardless of whether it offends them, because the truth is the only thing that's going to make them more free and more prosperous. Hear, hear.